Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have my very first speaker on this channel, Jude. He's a therapist and also has a great YouTube channel called Being Integrated Pragmatic Mindfulness. If you don't know me as well, my name is Anna. I'm a clinical psychology doctorate student. I'm also a therapist as well. Before we get into the contents of this video, how women can support men, we need to talk about something. So on my video, 10 ways men can support women, there was a very loud minority that took great offense with the video, people calling me a hypocrite, sexist against men, bad at psychology, and even suggesting that I was going to get canceled for making a video on how men can support women. There were also many kind comments from men and women alike, and I thank everyone for that. I'm always feeling so blessed for all the supporters of this channel. The thing is, I was expecting some level of pushback from people who want to silence women talking about women's issues, because it's kind of the nature of the field. If a woman posts a video about feminism or helping women out, it's pretty much guaranteed to get those types of reactions from certain people on the internet. But I was not expecting the utter and complete lack of awareness that some people showed in their comments. There is nothing controversial about a woman asking men to emotionally support women. There's nothing controversial in talking about the unique challenges that women face. There's also nothing controversial about a woman asking men not to objectify them, to call out other men when they're being misogynistic, to split the work 50-50, to not be entitled to our bodies. Like I mentioned in the beginning of that video, just because I talk about women's issues specifically from time to time does not mean that I don't care about men's issues. But bringing up men's issues in a conversation about women's issues is not a sign that you're an egalitarian. It's a sign that you don't like what I have to say and you want to silence me. It would be ridiculous for someone to, for example, go on an LGBT channel and start commenting, well, what about heterosexual issues? So why is it that you feel like you have a right to do that on a video about women? And it's not even like this channel is for women exclusively. The vast majority of my videos are not addressed to any gender in particular. They are meant to help any gender of a person with their mental health. My relationship videos are not even addressed to straight women. They are addressed to people in particular, and I try to be as gender and sexual orientation inclusive as possible. And yet somehow the occasional video about women's issues specifically is a hate crime against men. The reason I'm making this video about how women can support men is because I acknowledge that the patriarchy also hurts men, and that there are things we need to do to fix that. And like I said, I didn't want to make my own list of ways women can support men because I am not a man. My video on how men can support women was not, hey, look at the study I found or look at the research I collected. It was from my personal experience, this is what I need. So I cannot say that from a man's perspective. From a perspective as a woman, I cannot say, hey, this is what men need from us. So when Jude made a comment in response to a couple of other comments on that video, I thought it was a great idea to collab with him because he's been such a great, insightful, warm person on this channel, always commenting wonderful things, and he's a male therapist, so he really knows men's issues. And of course, it is important to discuss men's issues as well. But let me be very clear about something. I did not make this video for the people crying reverse sexism on my other video. If you were one of the people that got angry with a video on how men can support women, I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that you're probably not offended by this video on how women can support men. So why is the opposite true? And why do you think that there were also men in the comments of my other video expressing gratitude for being told how to support women, and who commented about their efforts in helping women and discussed the main challenges of doing so? Why do you think that when I came home from work that day, my boyfriend told me great video and was not offended whatsoever? It is because there was nothing controversial about that video. If you are someone who gets violently offended by the idea of emotionally supporting women, you are no better than the men commenting overtly sexist things on my videos. With that aside, let's get into the video because I do think it's really important to discuss how women can support men. Oh, hi, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, my name is Jude. I'm like an integrative counselor and meditation teacher in Toronto, Canada. I have studied a lot of different kind of stuff, and I integrate it all. And I have a YouTube channel called Being Integrated, where the whole idea is to make growth practices and healing practices more available to people. So there's a lot of talk around like how do we grow and heal, but this is like to really guide people through the process of healing and growing and well-being, all of that. So you can check out Being Integrated.
Yeah, I'll link your URL down below. And I think
Cool.
that's awesome because people don't always have access to therapy or access to this kind of coaching. So it's awesome
Right.
that, instead of getting nothing, that at least they can get these on YouTube.
Yeah, well, that was my whole oh, I'm getting feedback. Oh, it's okay. That was my whole idea around doing it. It was actually the start of the pandemic, and I was like online on Facebook, on all these different Reddit and all these platforms, and I saw so many people struggling, and I was like, well, it's like, people would say, go get therapy, and they're like, I can't afford therapy. So I was like, okay, well, maybe, this is where I can like offer something, right? And it's obviously because everybody has their own unique challenges, so not every practice is going to account for what they're specifically challenged with, whereas with a therapist, like that's you get that one-on-one attention. But being so, it's like when you start to learn the principles, you start to be able to be your own guide in your own growth process.
Yeah, that's awesome. And to kind of introduce the topic, we're here to talk today about how women can support men in the unique issues that men experience in our current society. So
Mm-hmm.
we're being here because, as I mentioned in the other video, I'm not a man, so I can't really speak on these. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that you have a lot more insight than I would if I tried to pretend I was in a man's shoes.
Right. Yeah, I think these are such complex topics, and there's so much going on because we talk about women and men, but really like women and men are really diverse groups, right? And all women have different experiences, and all men have different types of experiences. And I think one of the differences is that I think on a universal level, most women experience sexism. Like, maybe all women experience sexism, whether or not they're aware of it. But I think most women are aware of experiencing sexism. And men don't have that universal experience, right? Some men experience certain biases in certain professions or whatever it is. But I think they're quite different topics in that sense. I could speak a bit to why I think, as you said, you got some negative feedback on your last video, and I've been really curious about that. Like, how all these men get triggered by, women talking about how they experience sexism. And I think one of the issues is that, first of all, anytime we're triggered, like, so I started studying like psychotherapy and kind of group training stuff, like almost 15 years ago. It was like 14 years ago. And at that time, the word triggered wasn't really known outside of psychotherapy circles, and it wasn't seen as a bad thing. Like, if you got triggered, that's like, okay, this is something that we can look at. This is something like, oh, there's an emotional reaction here. Let's explore this. Let's learn from it. Let's learn where we have this unconscious kind of emotional complex around this issue. And that's a place we can do work and grow and explore. And so I don't mean to be like, when I talk about people being triggered, it's not a bad thing. So when some men are triggered when people are talking about like women's rights and whatnot, or how women experience sexism, I think for some of them, it's that when you talk about men as being certain ways, often sexist men may be a minority, maybe a majority, but some men, they feel like you're talking about all men, like, oh, all men are sexist or all these things, right? And I think for them, that could be frustrating. A lot of men have had their own unique experiences of being either like abused or manipulated by women, right? And I think that when you talk about women's and men's issues, they have this kind of emotional baggage that they carry around that. So when it comes up that like, oh, they perceive this view as like, oh, men are the bad guys, or men are this way or that way. And they're not really listening to what's being said. They're just projecting their own kind of hurt and pain and say, well, I'm suffering too, right? It's not just women who suffer, that I suffer as well. But clearly in your video, that's not what you were saying. You were just saying these are ways that women experience sexism, and it'd be great if like men were more aware of these and kind of accounted for them in their relationships. And so yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it goes along with that just worldview where you think that the world is pretty much just and men and women have an equal amount of sexism or unique challenges. And of course, women can manipulate, women can be bad guys too, but in terms of misogyny, it's usually referring to the institutionalized sexism against women, where
Mhm.
no, not all men are misogynists, but all women have experienced misogyny, like you were saying.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then I also mentioned to you earlier about this idea that like I do feel like we all have like men have a responsibility, but everybody has a responsibility to account for these like injustices in the world. And that this is a bit different than the men's issues because I mean, as we'll get into, a lot of the men's issues are about stuff that we need to take responsibility for ourselves. Maybe we just weren't shown how to, we never got the guidance or the modeling around it. But with women's, a lot of the sexism stuff, it's like these are things that we all need to act on. And I don't see it as like a men's or a women's issue. I just see it as a human thing that like, oh, if there's injustice in the world, if people are experiencing, like either abuse or sexism, all these things, it's like we need to collectively care. And it's like this idea of, like when you go camping, they say leave your campsite better than you found it, and it's like, so if you show up and there's some garbage on your campsite, when you leave, you clean up, even though you didn't create that garbage, you're being a decent person by picking up that garbage as well. And I think it's like we're born into this world that's like full of all of these issues. And to just say like, oh, that I didn't create that and therefore I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's like, that's fine, but it just leads to more isolation. And then you're not, when you, the beauty of like caring for people and doing things for others is that it helps you feel connected to them and it helps you feel happier. It's actually good for you. If you don't care about anyone else, you're going to end up like miserable and sad and, all these other, it's like really, not good. So I think like, and this is what Buddhism teaches, which, I talk a lot about in my channel, is that caring for others is caring for ourselves, right? And that if we want to be happy, we have to feel connected to others by caring for them.
Yeah, I really like that metaphor of the campsite, and even if it's not your mess, pick it up.
Yeah, it's a good one.
You want to introduce what most of the points will revolve around today?
Yeah. So most of the points. Okay, so first of all, so for the last 2 years, I've been doing men's work, right? I've been involved in this men's group, and it's this really great organization. It kind of started in the United States called Everyman, and it's about men coming together and learning how to feel their feelings and express their feelings. And like that's it. That's really what it's all about. And they do a lot of exercises and retreats, and they help you form groups so men can support other men in expressing their feelings and feeling their feelings and being able to name what they're feeling. And it's huge. Like this is, I've met so many men through these groups and through these retreats, and they're all like normal guys. They're like, great people. And then I've also, had a lot of clients who are men. And it's really, you see that this is really what men need. What men need is a way to own their feelings and to not feel ashamed of their feelings. And to, and so when you're in these like men's group, it's like being given permission by other men to feel, right? Which is so powerful. And I think, on one hand, it's like it's up to us to take responsibility for our feelings and express them. But if we were never given the support or given permission to do so, it can be great if we all, help each other in doing this. And so I think, of course, women can play a role in this as well, in like helping men kind of acknowledge, their feelings and learn to express them in a healthy way.
Yeah. I used to always say that, men aren't allowed to show any emotion, but then I realized
Mm-hmm.
they are allowed to show one emotion, which is anger.
Mm-hmm.
I also realized I was actually just reading this book. I have it right next to me, Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger.
Mm-hmm.
It goes into how rage and anger are the one emotion that women can't show. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of sad that we have to gender emotions and split them up in between this group of people has a right to express this and this group of people has a right to express this other emotion.
Right. Right. And like the more work I do with clients, the more I see that men and women are like really similar. Like they're treated different in the world often, but internally we're so similar. And I have also a lot of women clients who have these same challenges around expressing their feelings. A lot of them are, like successful professionals, and they work in these environments where, they're expected to be professional and not emotional, and then they just kind of adopt that as their identity, and probably also connected to their early family life. But so these aren't just challenges that men face, right? These are challenges that lots of people face.
Yeah, and what we're really talking about is trends, because within group differences will always be bigger than between group differences. So of course these can apply to different groups of people, but it's just trends for, men specifically, for women specifically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, so we're just talking about like generalities here. And I think it's like, yeah, it's really important to keep in mind that when we say men or women, we're not talking about all men or all women or any of these things, or, also to account for like trans and non-binary, that, many people of all different, gender identities, have similar types or different types of experience. And like, that's just always going to be the way it is. Okay, so the first point around how women can support men, which is inviting vulnerability, right? And this can be tricky because it has to be kind of invited, right? You have to create this safe space. You can't just say, I want you to be vulnerable now, because vulnerability means we're taking a risk. It means that there's a risk of us being hurt. And so if we're going to take a risk, express something where we might, get hurt around, if the person doesn't receive it well, doesn't acknowledge it, it could be very hurtful. We have to feel safe to express it. So you have to create this environment where we feel safe to, show our sadness or show our disappointment, show these kinds of feelings where we could really, we're really taking a risk. So one of the ways in which people can do this, which women can do it for men, is to start by being vulnerable themselves, to set that kind of environment by saying, hey, you know what, like I've been feeling really sad lately, or I've been feeling this way lately, and to talk about it and create that connection, and then be like, how have you been feeling? I've noticed, you've been, acting a bit, this way. Are you feeling this way? Or, so to do it skillfully, to really try to attune to the other person, and to try to feel, okay, well, what will help this person feel safe to express how they're feeling?
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like for a lot of women, sometimes we tend to shut down when we have these emotions instead of modeling how to express them, because part of the fear is, we're also going to be invalidated. But
Right.
I can definitely see how some women, especially some higher in benevolent sexism or even hostile sexism, might think that if a man expresses his emotions, that he's being a wuss, or he's not a real man, or his pain isn't valid, or he should just suck it up and keep it to himself.
Mm-hmm.
Something to construct.
Exactly. So that's all stuff super, these are the things that keep men feeling like they have to hold it all in, and it can be really difficult and harmful, right? Like just even the idea of men crying is often something that's really looked down on upon, especially by other men, or sometimes by women as well. So it's like to just watch what you're saying when you see other men being vulnerable, to acknowledge it as like a good thing, and to not tease them or anything like that.
Hmm.
All right, move on to the next one. Okay, so the next one is don't minimize feelings. And especially men, we do this to ourselves all the time. People ask how we're doing, and we say, oh, I'm okay, or it's not a big deal, or I don't care, right? These are ways that we minimize our feelings, and so it's funny in these men's groups, you're not allowed to say like words like, oh, I feel a little sad. They're like, no, just say I feel sad, try that on, right? And it's like it really hits on such a deeper way, because when we say like, oh, I feel a little bit sad, we're not really allowing ourselves to feel what's there. We're only allowing ourselves to feel a little bit, and often there's a lot more there. So we want to be able to express how we're feeling, like, oh, I feel sad, and that's okay, right? Or whatever the feeling is. So people do this all the time. They minimize their feelings, and of course in like professional type environments, it's not always a good place to be expressing big feelings, but you need these places where you can express the feelings.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think part of helping people not minimize their feelings is helping validate their feelings. And as therapists, we get trained in that a lot more than the average person. So
Mm-hmm.
some popular phrases that people can use is, that must have been really hard for you, or I'm so sorry you experienced that, or thank you for sharing this with me, thank you for trusting me with this. Or even how does that make you feel? You know, the typical stereotypical
Right.
therapist line.
Yeah, and it's amazing how sometimes I've had that from my therapist, and it's like so validating to hear that when they really mean it. Sometimes some therapists use it as like the line, you could tell it's a line, but a good therapist, you can tell they really mean it when they say it. They're really validating, and it feels actually really good. There is a real discernible shift that happens internally. And another thing that to take it even further than that, which especially in therapy settings, is to say, okay, wow, like you acknowledge it. And then I do this with clients all the time. I say, where are you feeling it? Oh, I'm feeling that in my chest. Okay, like let's go into that a bit more. Like put your hand on your chest, feel into that, breathe into it. And so to really open these feelings, especially if the person's like tightened up and closes up around feelings, you want to work to like say, hey, it's okay to feel this, right? And allow yourself to kind of open to it bit by bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and one more point on this. Another way that I've had many clients minimize their feelings, men especially, by being like, oh, I'm like a white man and I have a good job. I don't deserve to feel sad. Like I have so much to be grateful for. I shouldn't feel sad. I shouldn't be depressed. And it's really not healthy. It's good that, we acknowledge where we have privilege and whatnot, but again, that we're just minimizing. And what happens is when we minimize our feelings, we shut down. And then also our compassion shuts down. Our ability to connect with others shuts down. We end up feeling even more isolated. So it's like acknowledging feelings helps us also connect to others.
Yeah, I agree. And that's otherwise you just get to compassion fatigue.
Right. The next point is normalize the expression of feelings, desires, and boundaries. Right. And so this is often in relationships, we're kind of giving ourselves these subtle cues around like, oh, I feel like this. With men and women in long relationships, it can also be around sex. Like one partner will feel like having sex and the other won't, but they won't actually say it. They won't actually talk about it. But it happens up in so many other ways. Boundaries with just, these things, play a role in all parts of life. And I often find most people don't really have a good sense of healthy boundaries, right? Of saying like, this is what I want and this is what I don't want, or this is acceptable behavior and this is not acceptable behavior. And so that to explore these things and to be able to name them and talk about them is so liberating, right? To like have these relationships where you're kind of dancing around each other, not really communicating what you like and what you don't like and what you want in the relationship. And so part of this, there's this thing called that they talk about it called like a nice guy syndrome. And there was actually a book written by a psychotherapist called No More Mr. Nice Guy, which I don't love the title. But it's actually a great book of him noticing all these men who try to get what they want from women by being nice. So they'll do lots of nice things, but then they expect the woman to know what they want in return, and the woman doesn't know because they never say, okay, well, I want this. And then they end up getting angry and frustrated that like, okay, well, I was nice to you, I did this for you, and you didn't do anything for me. And they're like, but I didn't know like that was the exchange that we had. We didn't have an agreement around that. So it's like making these things clear, saying like, hey, I like you. This is, especially like dating in the early stages, there can be a lot of like dancing around, and that's okay. But when these things come up, it's really great and liberating to actually like name them and talk about them.
Yeah, and also, if there's some incongruences in what two people want, also that's a good way to figure it out early on than to have these misunderstandings later. Because if you're not, two people who want the same thing, or you can't give each other what you want, then better to find out sooner rather than later.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing around that is that like all relationships, there's some degree of sacrifice or some degree of negotiation in in what both people want and what their needs are. And that's just a reality, and that's part of it. And that's beautiful when we make a sacrifice for our partner. It can feel really good for both parties, but we just have to have agreements. Like if it's starting to feel out of balance, that one person's making all the sacrifices, oh, we're always going to where you want, but never. So these things, talking about them and saying, this is how I feel. I feel like I'm doing a lot for you, but you're not doing enough for me, or whatever it is. It's great to talk about these things. And there could be a lot of fear. People freeze up often when it comes because there's vulnerability there. The person could say, well, no, like I don't want to do that, or I don't like you that way, or whatever it is. But once we, come into this over and over and test these boundaries bit by bit, there starts to be less fear. Once we realize that, like, oh, I expressed, something to them and they said no, but then they still like me. It's not like they left me and rejected me or thought badly of me or spread rumors about me. It's like they actually end up respecting you more for expressing, right? And I've had this happen where I expressed interest towards a woman, and then she was like, no, I'd rather be friends. And then we became really good friends, and the friendship becomes really authentic because we both know where each other stand, right? There's no like miscommunications, there's no weirdness. It's just like it becomes very genuine.
Yeah. And I absolutely think that this applies to friendships too, because it can be so empowering to just hear a man very explicitly saying his boundaries to a woman. Like, I have this male friend, we have a very like banter-like relationship, and it's just very characterized by a lot of teasing. And one time, I think I was teasing him a little too excessively, and he flat out said to me, did you call me here to laugh about me? And I was mortified because I thought it was, just the nature of our relationship. But here was this very macho, very masculine bodybuilder guy very clearly expressing that he was hurt by something that I said. And it was a
Mm-hmm.
very efficient way of getting me to stop what I was doing, because this way the other person actually knows, okay, my feelings are hurt. This is a boundary. We can move forward from here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something to be said for like acknowledging the sensitivity in others. It's like some people aren't that sensitive. That's just a truth, but a lot are. And then they, and so some people, if they're not that sensitive, they don't understand people who are, right? They're like, oh, well, why, and so it's just, you have to acknowledge that people experience the world differently, right? Experience their emotions differently. And so it's like, we really have to, be thoughtful about that.
Yeah, and that men can be sensitive too.
Okay, so this one's kind of connected. It's the next one, which is don't expect men to always be able to read signals, right? And I think this is kind of like a cliche. It's kind of like a joke that like men can't take a hint, but it's partially true. Some men are really bad at it, and especially I have a few clients who have like autism spectrum disorder, and they have no idea. Like, and it's not like they're not listening or they don't care. They just don't understand a lot of social cues, and this is common among many people. So it's like if we really want to make something clear, a signal of how we want someone to act or how we don't want them to act, or how they're behaving in a certain way. So we want to try to make it clear, right? And as the relationship goes, there can be if it's a relationship or any type of relationship, as it goes, there can be you can learn more and more about through the communication process, right? With like, okay, oh, I get it. Like sometimes, you get frustrated and then you just need some space to cool down. I get that, right? And it's like, that because they've communicated like, hey, don't try to, engage with me when I'm in this place because I need that space for myself or whatever it is. So it's like, it'd be really helpful to learn how to express your needs like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point about how in a relationship you start to get much more attuned to the other person and these little nonverbal signs too. Like, I know when I get upset, apparently I start to like prop my head up like this. And my boyfriend pointed that out because he can tell I'm upset before even I know it. And he'll say, what are you anxious about? And then I'll think, wow, I didn't even realize I was anxious, but
Right.
anxious about. So
Right.
kudos to those who are very good at reading signals. And I think part of that is, once you start to develop a bond with someone, you start to care a lot more and notice these signals much better.
Right. And that touches on another point that sometimes we don't even know how we feel. We're so stuck in our thoughts. We're not paying attention that if somebody's like, oh, how do you feel? Or you want them to be vulnerable, express how they're feeling. They may be so engaged in their thought process that they're not even paying attention to how they feel. So that, is often the case. So it can be helpful to kind of drop into the body. Uh, yeah. Explore the feelings.
Yeah.
So
One thing I do want to mention though, this should never be used to like excuse not understanding consent,
right.
because there are very clear verbal and nonverbal cues when someone's not interested. So that's not really
Right.
in that scenario.
Right. And if guys ever want to if you're having this issue of like, oh, there's this in the age of consent, I don't know how to, I'm worried, you can just say, you could just say like, hey, like I really want to kiss you right now, or how do you feel about kissing, or like these things. Like I've never had that go badly for me, in the sense of someone like so offended. So it's like you can just ask like very matter of factly if you're really not sure, and just see how they react. And usually women appreciate it, in my experience at least, and from what I hear from other men, that it's like some men are like, oh, it's going to kill the mood, but not if you do it in the right way. If you do it in the right way, it can be totally fine.
Yeah, it just seems like being polite and better to be safe than sorry.
Right, especially in the age of coronavirus, where there's a whole distancing thing, right? So even just coming close to somebody, it's like you need to kind of need someone's consent to come within a few feet of them. So it's a great way to ask consent. How do you feel about getting closer? So um, great. So the next point, to get clear on the expectations or the roles in the relationship. And this comes from, we come from a culture, at least here in the West, where there's these gender roles. We have a history of these gender roles where like men take care of the finances, and women take care of the kids and the cooking and cleaning. And now there's not clear gender roles, or at least not everywhere you go. Some people make their roles or what role they want to play clear, but a lot of people don't. And so to that could be a great thing to talk about, and to not expect something of the other without actually them making it clear, right? And I know someone will say, I like traditional gender roles. I want to do raise the kids and do cooking and cleaning, and that's fine if they want to do, but they have a choice in it, and it's their choice, right? And the same with men. It's like men can choose to I want a woman who does this, and I want to be the one to take care of finances, or I want like more shared roles in these different various responsibilities. So to just talk about these things, get clear on what you want. And these things are always negotiations. You have to negotiate and agree, unless you two have the exact same idea in the start.
Yeah, and just like it wouldn't be necessarily appropriate to assume that your partner is going to be a housewife, not necessarily appropriate to assume that your partner is going to be the sole breadwinner either. So
Yeah,
communicate.
exactly. So the next point relates to what we mentioned earlier about anger, and about how it's one of the only socially acceptable feelings for men to express. And that's not always true. There are a lot of contexts where it's really not okay for men to express anger. I always felt I've never been an angry person. I've always felt self-conscious about expressing anger. But a lot of men do express it. And the whole idea is to look for the feelings underneath the anger. That anger is always like a resistance to feeling something underneath it, right? It's pretty much pain and sadness, right? There's always pain and sadness underneath anger. So if we want to, if we're a woman wanting to support a man who's feeling angry, you can, when the time feels right, you can skillfully be like, okay, like, yeah, you seemed really upset about that. Maybe you were hurt, maybe you felt sad. And to look for like, if somebody gets mad at their boss could actually be really making them feel, either insignificant, or like they're not good enough, or all these other feelings. So to go in deeper and look at what feelings are underneath the anger, that's hugely helpful. If we ever want to work with any type of anger issues, it's about processing those underlying feelings and allowing ourselves to feel and express them.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is when men get rejected by a woman and sometimes they get angry. It might be healthier to instead admit, I'm hurt that I was rejected. What does that say about me? It makes me feel like I'm not good enough or I don't have value, which would be probably a healthier, more constructive way than just saying, this bitch, like, how could she, how could she reject me?
Right. Yeah, exactly. We can go to the next one, which is, don't expect to be rescued by heroic acts, which is essentially, we all grew up, or at least I did, and most people grew up watching Disney movies where there's like a woman in distress, and then this like, prince, some guy comes along and does some heroic act and rescues her. And I think a lot of women, I know women have confessed this to me, that they've been waiting for some guy to come along and rescue them. And you just have to think about, well, one, it's not really practical. Two, it's like, guys don't know if you want to be rescued. It's kind of like this thing of like, it feels almost like saying, oh, you can't care for yourself, or you're not okay on your own, and therefore I must rescue you. And then there's also creates this dynamic that plays out in the relationship later, if that's how it started, that that is not even, it's not healthy for either person, right? We kind of want to have more of a mutual kind of agreement, a shared responsibility in the relationship, and not one person always expecting the other person to rescue them.
Yeah, sadly, I see this a lot with my female clients where they know cognitively, like, I should be strong, I don't need a man, but then emotionally, they still kind of want to be saved in some way.
Right. Yeah. And we can look at this too as like an attachment issue, but that's a whole, other thing you can deep dive. But a lot of these issues, come from attachment, right? And this yearning for this kind of safe space with another to have that healthy attachment system.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next point, which is be sensitive to his financial situation, right? And I think that we're living in a world where a lot of people are struggling financially, and it's really nice. I've been on dates where I felt really nice that the woman like kind of offered to pay for her part or whatever it was. And when I was doing well financially, I was like, no, it's okay. Like I asked you out, so I'll pay for it. But when I wasn't doing well financially, it was really great, because I was in school for a while and money was tight, and so it's great. Just, and I'm not saying like women should do that, but just be sensitive. Just check in, or you can kind of get a feel for, are you in school, or if they're working, if they're earning good money, and like for example, don't, if they are in school, they're not really working a lot, whatever it is, then maybe like don't suggest that you go to really expensive restaurants, or when you do go out, don't order the most expensive things, or just check in, like feel it out, right? Get a sense of where this person is at, and what yeah where what their relationship to money is.
Yeah. I know that there's this movement lately of women expecting men to pay for everything in a relationship. And I can understand that it's, the whole pink tax thing and how much money is spent into how women look. But at the same time, I don't think the solution to that is to make individual men suffer, but to fix the society and to fix the pink tax and to fix the unrealistic expectations that are put on women. And otherwise, it's just adding more fuel to these other movements of men saying that women are all gold diggers and the hypergamous nature of women. I'm sure you've heard. So, yeah, I think the best solution would be to aim for equality and try to do that by addressing the society rather than punishing
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to the other point too, which is just be clear about what your roles are in the relationship, because maybe the man does want to pay for everything, but then he has certain expectations that come with that. So just be clear that if he is paying for stuff, does he expect something from that? And sometimes he will have these expectations, but he'll never voice them. And then when they aren't met, he'll get angry, and you'll be like, why is this guy getting angry? And so it's like, because we're not really communicating what our real expectations are.
Yeah, exactly. My grandma, she used to always say that when she went on dates with my grandpa in the early stages, she would refuse to eat anything because she didn't want to owe him. And
Right.
my grandpa was a great guy. I don't think he would have seen it in that way, but it was just funny because she was like, "No, I'm not going to owe him anything. He won't be able to say that I owe him anything."
Right. It's like these weird psychological games that we play, right? And yeah, I've heard similar things, right? That women not expect not taking, yeah, letting men pay or taking gifts or anything, because exactly, they don't want them to feel indebted, or that they have to return the favor somehow.
Mhm.
So yeah, so just communicate. Communication's like such an amazing thing. It's just like there's often this fear around doing it because there's vulnerability in it. But as we practice it, we get better at it, and then there's less fear around it. There's less anxiety around it, and it makes all of our relationships better. So communication is great. Okay, so the next point I have is to appreciate the man beyond the superficial, right? So that I think a lot of men feel their value is tied up in either their job, how much they're earning, or some sort of social status thing. Or it could even be like, if they're a bodybuilder, if they're really fit. There's all these superficial ways in which everyone, men included, try to make ourselves feel better, and try to make ourselves, more, up our social status, up our status, right? And so it really feels nice when people appreciate us for something that's not one of those things, right? For our genuine kind of interests or skills or our personality. And I'm sure it's the same with, women being often just appreciated if they're, very beautiful. And if that's all the validation they get, then they start thinking that that's like their only value. That's all they have to offer, right? And so just like when we validate people for superficial reasons, it sends this message that's like, hey, that's what your value is, right? So we want to appreciate other aspects of people that's not superficial.
Yeah, I think that's very linked to people's insecurities too, because when women feel insecure, they tend to go towards self-improvement physically, and sometimes I feel like men try to flex socially or financially. Like I remember I was a hostess at a restaurant back in Atlanta, and there was this one guy who kept calling me over to talk to him. And I just wanted to do my job, didn't feel like flirting with him, but the manager essentially told me to. And I think it was very clear that I kept wanting to go back to my job. And at the end, I think he got a little offended because there was like a sports car right outside the restaurant. And he said, "You see that car? That's mine." And then he did like a and left. And it was just such a moment of clarity that like he was feeling insecure. So that was why he was flexing these superficial things.
Totally. Yeah. It's a very, could be very touchy. And I think something else that ties into this is this issue of identity that, men used to have their identity was tied to their careers. This is like kind of Western culture was like, your value was like, oh, you were like a banker or whatever it was. And now there's a lot of career changes and there's a lot of, this whole idea of identity is like this new, there's as some people say, there's like a meaning crisis, right? It's like, what is meaningful to me? And so I think what we all need to do, like, as a collective human race is like find identities that have better values, that have, things that are discover what's personally meaningful to us and kind of organize ourselves around that as opposed to like more superficial type values and identity.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific meanings or identities that you've noticed with the men you've worked with?
Yeah, like I mean, there's like the some of the really common ones are of course like being a father, being a husband even, and then also it could be around. I mean, I obviously have a lot of friends who are therapists, so for a lot of them, it's like helping people, helping like it's for me, it's like, what is your role in the world? What's your role in society? What is your role? And I think for what like my bias is, and I think this kind of proves true, is that it should be around helping the collective, right? That any sort of thing that doesn't also help the collective, that isn't for the collective well-being, is not going to really make you happy, or it's not really going to satisfy. It's not going to be fulfilling. So like anything that is, offering something, playing some role, doesn't mean it has to be selfless at all. It could be something that's very, that you get a lot out of. Like for me, obviously, the work I do, it's like I get a lot out of that, and it also helps others, and that's the beauty of it. So it doesn't have to be anything fantastic. There's actually, I really love, there's a lot, like I study a lot of existential psychology, right? Like Viktor Frankl and Rollo May, Irvin Yalom, like these people write a lot about this. James Hollis is probably one of my favorite. It's like they write about discovering what's personally meaningful, and this is like it's a journey to discover that. So I think, and it's difficult, especially that our world doesn't support it. It's kind of one of my favorite topics to explore because it's so unique to each individual, right? Around what's personally meaningful for you. Yeah.
You mentioned parenting. How is that unique for men?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I was going to mention this too. So I've heard from a number of men around parenting that that they felt like this sense of like insufficiency around not being the same, not having the same attachment as the mother has to the child, right? And this is especially in the first year, 2, 3 years, that that when the kid starts crying, they want mommy. Daddy doesn't quite do, and they feel like this, like, oh, but I want to be that to the child. And it's just the reality is that that child came out of the biological mother's body, or whoever the primary attachment is, that is so like ingrained in the child's like physiology that is what's so comforting for them, especially if they're nursing as well, right? Like if one parent is nursing, and that's the only parent that's nursing, and the child's really, that's going to be their comfort space. And so they're going to want that parent. And so it takes years for the same type of attachment to develop with the father, but it does happen. If the father is really there, really present, really acknowledging and validating of the child's feelings, then that same attachment will form. And I've seen it happen, with men. I know that when the child gets hurt and starts crying, sometimes they'll cry, for daddy as well. Right. But it's usually like, from what I've seen, around like 4 or 5 when that starts happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I was listening to, I don't know if you know Esther Perel
Yeah. She's great.
podcast, Where Do We Begin, where it's basically her doing couples therapy on air. And there was this lesbian couple, and one of the moms was complaining that she doesn't really have the same connection to the children than the biological mother. So I definitely think that this can be an issue, not just in heterosexual relationships, but really in any relationship where there is a biological mother and another parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned Esther Perel, because the men's group I was talking about, Everyman, right? She's actually the only woman to ever go on an Everyman retreat, because it's an all men retreat, because she heard about it, was curious, and she loves the organization. She highly recommends it to men because she found the work they were doing was so valuable for men.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much for being on the channel and for giving us these insights on how women can support men.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, first of all, I really loved your last video. I thought it was actually really helpful, and there was a few things in it that I hadn't thought of as a man, or that maybe like I hadn't thought of in quite a while. So I would recommend any men to go, if they haven't already, to check out the last video, because it's a really great complement to this video. And then also, yeah, if you want to keep up with me, check out my YouTube channel, Being Integrated. It's all like mind body growth practices, healing practices. Right now, a lot of it's around teaching meditation and mindfulness, like mindfulness in everyday life, like outside of a meditation practice. But it's also about things like self-love and how we change. So there's a lot there, and it's going to continue to do it. Going to be like amping it up more soon. So there'll be a lot more videos soon because I'll have more time.
Yeah, I'm excited for them.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.